In today's video, I want to talk about intrinsic motivation and why it matters in today's leadership. We find a lot of people that are looking for autonomy, employees, team members who want this feeling of autonomy in their work. They don't want to be controlled. And we find a lot of leaders that are trying to empower and provide autonomy for the people that they lead, but they know as business owners and as directors and executives that it feels like they have to have some kind of control because, at the end of the day, the buck stops with them. And we're trying to constantly find the interplay between offering autonomy and empowerment, but also having control. When work is complex and requires creativity and innovation, how do you lead people in a way where the external motivators go away, where they're gone, where we're not trying to motivate people this way, we're trying to let them function from an intrinsic motivation? How do you lose control while still leading? Edward Deci wrote a book in the 90s called Why We Do What We Do. And in that book, he breaks down about 20 years of research that he did on intrinsic motivation. And he came to a number of breakthrough and landmark discoveries. Let me introduce it to you this way. A lot of us are trying to figure this out, and we're trying to figure it out on an axis here, or a continuum of control on one side and autonomy on the other. What Deci suggests is that there's another axis that we need to be thinking of. That actually there's one that runs this way, and on one side of it, he puts the concept of permissiveness. That sometimes when offering autonomy, what you're offering is permissiveness. You're just letting everybody do whatever they want. Now, there's a way in which that's what autonomy means, letting people do whatever they want. That would be independent autonomy. There's also a way where we have an interdependent autonomy, where just being permissive doesn't actually work. And in interdependent autonomy, you still can have leadership. So he's like, permissiveness is on this side, but what's over here? What's on the other side of this? And he says, limit setting. Now, this gives us a 2x2 matrix that we can start to consider how these four ideas interact with each other. And I would suggest that there is a way that you can set limits that is very controlling, that you can actually use limits to maintain a very tight standard upon which people have to navigate through your system and processes a very particular way. And I would call this a demand-based leadership model. And keep in mind, I don't think this is wrong. I think there are situations where this actually is necessary. So you can set very tight limits and actually maintain control and use external motivation to get this done. There's also a way in which permissiveness can be very controlling. You may have had a leader someplace that was very permissive and grandiose in their language. They would use language like, "We believe in you, go, be creative, be yourself." And then a couple things can happen. One is it doesn't actually work. Like the market doesn't respond. The products don't work. It's too expensive. We're losing money. Or they don't like your work. It's embarrassing, or it makes them look or feel bad, or it doesn't meet some sort of arbitrary and unspoken standard. And all of a sudden they come in and all the permissiveness goes away and they just rip it all back. There was actually a control feature involved. You just may not have been aware of it, and you actually couldn't do whatever you wanted. But their early stage language of permission was actually nothing more than avoidance. Now, autonomy can be very permissive as well. There's a way in which you can be 100% permissive and give people total autonomy, but in that case, you're not leading anymore. You've actually abdicated. So what's up here? What is it that allows people to set limits and create autonomy? I think this is what we call a request-based leadership. And in request-based leadership, what you're doing is you're defining the limits, you're finding out where the parameters are in which a person has autonomy. Now, they don't necessarily have autonomy outside of those parameters, but inside those parameters, they do. And so if you as a leader step into that space, all you can do is say, I have a request. You can't make demands because they have autonomy. Now, let's take a minute and define autonomy a little bit more clearly. Autonomy, in this usage of the word, what we're talking about is actually showing up as the highest and best use of yourself. Autonomy is recognizing what you're good at and then wanting to do it. And if the correct space is created for you in which to do it, you don't have to be told what to do. It's what you want to do. The best example of this is raising kids. If you think about kids from 0 to 5, they are working all the time. They have all kinds of work that they need to get done. Like when a baby is little, you lay them on the floor on a blanket and they're just sitting there lifting their head. It's like full CrossFit for them. It's calisthenics. They're working on getting their head and looking around, and they want to do this. You don't have to tell them to. You don't have to teach them to. They're intrinsically motivated to get themselves strong enough to be able to explore the world. The limits that you put on that baby are something like the room I'm in. So the parent is like, you can be in this room, I'll be in this room, this blanket, there, we've set limits on you, and that is the right amount of space, but it's for a baby to learn how to lift its head. It's pretty tight space though. Those are pretty small limits. Over time, they're gonna have to grow because eventually the baby will learn how to roll over. Again, a ton of work. And then as they roll over, they learn how to get up on all fours, and then they start to crawl and they move around. Then they pull themselves up on couches, and eventually they learn to walk. At this point, you gotta expand the limits. It's no longer the room I'm in. The kid needs to start to explore beyond that. The space needs to grow. So now it's something like the house I'm in. You can't walk outside, and we certainly don't want to leave that kid walking around down at the grocery store by themselves. Like, that's really bad parenting. In fact, if you do that to one of these kids, they probably will stop working because you created too much space for them. It freaks them out and they just scream. You see, getting the limits in the right space is important. You can create too little space or too much space. Too little space and people feel stifled and they buck against it. They fight that. Too much space, they actually get scared and anxious. Getting the space correct is actually one of the greatest challenges of leadership. So let me talk just briefly about the kinds of things that can be effective limits. And remember, these same limits can be controlling. So you got to get them in the right place. But limits can be things like goal setting. A collective project of setting effective goals, organizational wide, that everybody is pulling together and working towards can be a great way of setting limits that allow us to work together and create teamwork. Another one can be KPIs, key performance indicators. We use these to establish the kind of space that this job is going to fulfill. If you can hit your KPIs, you belong in the space. Another one can be standards. You can use how fast do we need to get this job done or how slowly do we need to get this done. You can use core values or core behaviors, as we like to call them. We say, Seth Godin describes culture as people like us do things like this. That's a behavior set that is the definition of who we are. If you are participating in our goal setting, if you can hit KPIs, if you can hit our quality standards, if you can do things fast enough, if you can demonstrate through your behavior that you're in alignment with our culture, that you're participating in our culture, then you can create autonomy. The how you get things done, the when you get things done, the method you use, the processes you use, a lot of times those can be things of your own choosing. So let me ask you this. Are you the kind of leader that needs to be in control? All roads lead to you. You are the answer person. Or are you the kind of leader that can lose control by setting appropriate limits around work functions and turning that whole function, that department, that capacity over to somebody else and letting them autonomously run it? I would suggest to you that if your work is complex and requires creativity and innovation, the second leader is going to outperform the first.